Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion on astrology, art, and adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore the current planetary alignments and offer insights for coping with change. Educational, informative, enlightening, the Turning of the Wheel is a welcome pause in your daily swirl of constant change. Through intelligent discourse, inspired guests, and educational segments, I will help to enlighten your knowledge of astrology and guide you to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Call in with your questions and speak with some of the greatest visionaries in the time-tested practice of astrology. Turning of the Wheel, Astrology, Art, and Adventure with Chris Flisher each week on Turning of the Wheel podcast. Hello and welcome to Turning of the Wheel. My name is Chris Flisher. As you know, this is a show about astrology. And it's got a fabulous guest coming on, waiting in the wings right now to come on and talk about what we're seeing on the world stage right now. Because what we're seeing on the world stage is wise for us all to be aware of. We are in a time of enormous change and turmoil. And I think the more cognizant we are of that change and turmoil, the better we are prepared to adapt and sort of take proactive moves to sort of counteract that. So it's important. And astrology is a wonderful tool for that because it does provide a certain verification and validation of where we are, why we are where we are. And in that regard, I think having an overview of what we can expect allows us to sort of change the agenda or at least shape the conversation. So we'll get to that in a few minutes. I want to remind you about my newsletter, which comes out every Sunday afternoon. And in there I do a brief mundane overview of what's going on in the world with regard to eclipses and big planetary actions and changes and stuff like that. And then I break it out into the individual signs. I always encourage you to read your sun sign as well as your rising sign each week for greater accuracy and granularity. So without further ado, about probably about a year now, maybe a year and a half ago, I asked my guest to come on, Kate Petty, to come on. Her website is ambientastrology.com. We had a great conversation back then, and she is a specialist in a area of astrology probably not known to many people, known as the Antisha. She's going to discuss that a bit for us, and then we're going to discuss about what's going on in the world today as we see it through the eyes of the astrologers, and it's a fascinating look, and I'm so happy to have her back on the show today. Welcome again to Turning of the Wheel, Kate.
Thank you so much, Chris. I'm happy to be back.
Yeah, so, we had talked about the Antisha in the past, and I've been studying astrology for years, and I never really had a very good grasp of it. So maybe you could just give us a quick overview, and then we'll dive into some of the really wild angles we have going on right now, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, sure. So the Antisha or contra-Antisha points, Antisha means anti-opposite, Sia is shadow, so Antisha or Antisha. So they're opposite shadows, and the idea is they are reflections, basically, or shadow mirrors around the cardinal points. Mm-hmm. And I think if your listeners know even just a little bit about astrology, they know they do know that, cardinal signs. Yeah. So you have 0 Aries, which everyone knows, of course, is the equinox point, and 0 Cancer, the solstice, and so on. And these, of course, highly potent and important turning points seasonally and with, light and darkness. So they're very obvious, real, places of manifest and experience, and places where the world, our seasons change, and so our experience in the world changes. These points are obviously very important, and these are reflections, exact symmetries, like exactly the same space on either side symmetry around these points. And Antisha specifically are shadows around the Cancer or Capricorn point, the solstices, and then contra-Antisha around Aries and Libra. And the thing to keep in mind about them is Antisha are, when you can think of reflections and shadow and light. So around the solstice, you have the same amount of light in either direction. If you think on the solstice day, if you back up 45 days, somewhere into Taurus, right? Mm-hmm. And you 45 days forward into Leo somewhere, the same exact reflection there, it's the same amount of light on the planet and darkness. So that kind of symmetry is there. And then with the points in contra-Antisha, this is what we call equal ascension, which is a shared time rising. So this is a little more like technical, but it's the signs when they're rising on the horizon would rise at the same speed in
I
these
see.
times.
Yeah.
So
That's a good explanation. Makes a lot of sense too. It certainly seems to clarify for me. And of course, everybody can get more information if that's not clear enough on your website, ambientastrology.com, which is a great site. Very beautifully laid out site. Lots of information, highly educational, and very easy, very accessible information. So I encourage you all to look at the ambientastrology.com. It's Kate's site. So we have a lot of activity coming up. We just had an eclipse on the 10th of February. We're coming up with another one on the 26th. And when we run that through the eyes of the Antisha lens, for lack of a better word, what is it that we see? We see an awful lot of interesting things through the regular astrology eye, but I'm wondering how it looks through the Antisha eye.
I know. I mean, it really is interesting just on its own, right? Anyone that's looking ahead to that eclipse on February 26th. Sees, of course, right away, in addition to the Jupiter-Uranus opposition that we have had in effect and continues to be in very strong effect right now, and all the way through into September when its last final hit is. But we see that Mars comes to Uranus on that day, on the day of the eclipse. So that's obviously, a big deal. Does it mean that it will manifest an event that day? Not necessarily. But of course, what caught my attention right away is that conjunction where it occurs, which is where, Uranus has been around 21, 22 Aries. Where it occurs is in exact reflection around the Aries point back to that eclipse in Pisces. Because you'll think, these shadows, these reflection points, the opening, of course, is 0 Aries. So you're going to go back into Pisces if you're going forward into Aries. And that just happens to be this exact symmetry. So it really caught my eye. And
yeah, pretty powerful. I mean, you think about it, it's just incredible.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. And this is also, we know the eclipse is close to Neptune. It's not in exact or partile. We call that technically.
Right.
Conjunction, but it is still close, Neptune, and it is a south node eclipse, which is interesting, unlike the one coming in August, which is north node. But this closeness to Neptune, it's something that I'd like to mention to the listeners. Uranus has been in reflection to Neptune for a long time, and it just moved out of exactitude for the final bit of time, and this was in January. Some people would still consider them in, close enough orb. I think they are in some effect, but they were in and out of exactitude from about the spring of 2015 all the way up through to this last January, and they were dead on, at the election, and I mean, it really speaks to, I think, to a lot of different issues.
Well, especially when you think about what Neptune represents. I mean, I can think of nothing more descriptive of Neptune than the word delusion, and the fact that is such a. I mean, when you saw this character walk out on the stage on the Republican National Convention in a bank of fog, I said, well, that is just classic Neptune. You couldn't get more Neptunian.
Oh, exactly. No, and I think with the Uranus, kind of a shocking, really shocking, surprising events. You kind of get this mix of, I don't know if everyone remembers, but there were, if you remember around Halloween this last year, there were these weird clowns.
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah.
I mean, that was kind of like the icing on the cake of this strange year of fake news coming to become suddenly there were actually literally clowns. It's this absurd, surreal kind of.
Yeah, it's almost like a parallel universe that we're living in. It's almost as if something is happening it is a very, very unusual construct that's happening within this whole realm.
Totally. And, I've looked at, because when I saw the Uranus Neptune coming up a few years back, I kept my eye open for it, and I happened to notice there was, I think, the creation of the first pharmaceutical college in the U.S. under one of these, and and I have to think that, a lot of the legalization of marijuana occurred under this the last like 2 years.
Yeah.
So it definitely has kind of that drug signature.
And also the opioid crisis in the United States. That's a huge part.
Absolutely.
Yeah, huge part of
Absolutely.
fentanyl and all there's been an enormous amount of overdoses. It's an epidemic at this point, which is
Yep.
of course, very Neptunian, drug induced.
Absolutely. An epidemic, most definitely. So it's definitely manifest on multiple levels. And of course, a lot of people have been under an insane amount of stress as far as with a lack of work and other things. I mean, where I live out here in Seattle, there's a lot more plenitude of jobs and the economy is pretty different, I think. And I just know, so much of the rest of the country is not as sort of fortified.
Well, I know, but I think that is also a part of the fake news in some ways because those figures are really skewed. When we have 4.8 unemployment, that is pretty low. That's almost, that's about normal for the United States to be at. Now, granted, those numbers may be skewed by, unskilled, low-paying jobs. But it is still a healthy reflection of what possibly is the case. And here we are getting this message that, the world is coming apart at the hinges is sort of this infused sense of fear and doom that is being preached from above here that is really not accurate, I think. And that's that's the delusion part again.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you on that. I mean, I do think, we have a very large prison population, so that factor is, I think, taken out of that equation. But you're absolutely right. And I think that like doom and gloom, it's a false consciousness thing. There's something very like spreading disillusionment or something.
Right.
And I don't know if it's appropriate, I certainly don't think we're in some like pre-World War II, post-World War I Germany sort of state. I just don't, that's not what America is. That's not who we are, where we are at all. I don't.
But it certainly can feel like that sometimes. You have to admit, I mean, the fact that those words come to the page, come to me so easily, as well as you and other people I speak with, does give us pause because we do see commonalities there. What I was going to ask was, when you look back historically, do you see other times when this sort of alignment was prevalent?
Yes, absolutely, Chris. That's, I don't know if you happen to see that on my website, but I do, I reference, Ed Tamplin is an astrologer, I believe in Australia, who has some newsletters periodically, and he pointed out, this Uranus return from that time of the rise of the Third Reich and Hitler's being elected as chancellor. And I, of course, started looking at those charts more closely. And what I noticed, you better believe it, is not only was Uranus in about the same place that is now, but Neptune was in its opposite location in Virgo. Wow. And so what that means was Aries, that part of Aries where Uranus is, was reflecting Neptune then. So we have we're under the same energy in that way. So not only is it a Neptune, and Neptune was with the South Node, which I think, at least in my world with astrology, nodes are intersections, just like our ascendant and midheaven. So they have a lot to do with connections, past life or otherwise. So I think that it really kind of folds it. They're intersections, literally, or crossroads and people, and it's up again, this energy.
But we have to say something about the fact that in the position that it was back in 1939, which would have the Neptune in an opposition in Virgo, and now Neptune in Pisces, we would have to say at some point that even though the energy is similar, there is a difference.
Oh, there's absolutely a difference. And if listeners do want to look it up, the time that they were in a real close antitia is going to be in 1933. And then around that year, 32, 33.
Right. And that we would have had a Uranus return at the same time, which also speaks to the banking crisis of 2008, where everybody is calling the Great Recession, which actually is similar to a depression, but not quite as severe. But we're at a very critical point historically where we're trying to breach that gap between this myth of this bringing America back to what it once was, which we know we can't do, and sort of this denial of globalization as a thrust, and to shut ourselves off and to close our borders and to impose tariffs on on imported goods is going to do nothing to move the society, the race, the species forward. It's going to do exactly the opposite. That's the clarion call I think that needs to be heard.
Yeah, no, it's it's really frustrating for me to hear, who was it there? It might have been Jon Stewart. Someone said, really early, right after the election, was someone needed to ask what made America great or what makes America great. And I've been in marches and different things, and I really care about this country. Right. I actually have roots that go back to the founding fathers myself. But, America is great for all of what it is made of. It's not, there's nothing to return to. And part of
that's the great irony. What made us great was immigration. That's what we are. The world's best melting pot of all, and we've got proof to show that it works. And to try to do just the opposite of that in order to get back to where we were seems to me completely irrational and insane, almost. I have to say.
Yeah, truly. No, and it's very divisive, and that's very unfortunate because. I do think this Jupiter-Uranus opposition, just the nature of any opposition, is, opposing forces or it can be very polarizing. I think at its best, an opposition hopefully will become complementary or something. But right now, it's just this absolutely polarized sort of feel.
Right. But I feel as if we're working up to something, and I think that the fact that it is an opposition, I like the fact, and I agree with you, that it is, I think, reflective in that regard, meaning that that revolution is in the air, yes, but it seems as if it's revolution for a positive outcome. This is sort of the amplifying quality that and the beneficial quality that Jupiter brings to the equation. So yes, we do see, and we saw it in the resistance, we saw it in the Women's March, and we've never seen crowds that large before turn out en masse. Now we have to maintain that, I agree, but that I think is a very, very positive public outcry.
Absolutely. It was phenomenal. I mean, it was just so beautiful. I mean, to think, I think what was the range there? It was 3 to 4.5 million people marching. I mean, that is in just the United States, let
just
alone
the United States, yeah. If not
all those cities and countries. I mean, that is gorgeous. I agree with you as far as that Jupiter-Uranus. It can be.
And I think that if history teaches us anything, and this is sort of a broader context aside from astrology, you would think that we would perhaps, I'm sure you do. History and astrology are cyclical studies of time recurring, but they are on a helios, whereby we're down the road further each time we get to that same alignment. And I would think that we would have learned from the past what we had been through, and therefore this is an opportunity to say, let's not do it again. And so therefore, what once snowed people in during World War II, perhaps, and the rise of the Third Reich, would not be able to rise again because of that, perhaps having been down that road. That's what I would hope would happen.
It sure looks that way, doesn't it? As far as the immediate response to it, really.
A lot depends upon how effective the Congress is at this point in time, and I think that they've got to be looking at themselves and saying, do I hitch my wagon to this horse or do I not? And what happens when I'm up for re-election if I do hitch my horse to this wagon? They've got to be thinking about that, because at some point in time, all politicians are thinking about when they get elected next. As soon as they get elected, they start campaigning for the next election. So this is almost like a perpetual cycle. The problem is that we all get lost in their vicious circle of trying to solve these problems.
Right. Well, I guess we needed to kind of acknowledge how complicated some of the issues are and that we don't have easy solutions. In fact, I think that's maybe the big issue with the whole Make America Great or something, is that there's some easy solution to, increasingly a complex world. We live in a complex place that we should be, this could be, and probably is in many places, a highly innovative time. We are supposed to be responding to climate right now. and some people are, most definitely, thank goodness, but that's what this signature is, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And I think that I've always held the contention that the only way that the humanity as a species would unite is if we had, and this is a rather unusual twist, but if we had a common enemy. And what I mean by that is that it would be a unifying outside force that would drive us together in some way to say we've got to solve this problem now. And I always, when I was younger, I used to say, well, we're going to be invaded by aliens. But now I think that is the common enemy really is the climate. I think that's that we have to recognize, and that may come about as a result of something may happen, and I'm not trying to be an alarmist here, but something may happen that draws our attention that way, that says this can no longer be ignored or put aside, even though we are marching in exactly the wrong direction with regard to the EPA and all the other agencies that are involved in such a thing like this. It seems really, really unusual.
Yeah, no kidding.
And disturbing.
It's very disturbing. And I think, you could, with the enemy idea or this climate, kind of joining forces with each other and being headed in the same direction, like sort of should be like the way, you are in, if your marriage is working well or a partnership, that you're on the same team, like that whole sort of notion. And I think, ultimately, if we acknowledged maybe death more, just generally,
right,
that our time is finite, and it would create a lot more gratitude, I think, and just that we're all trying to kind of do the best that we can, or have as peaceful and productive as a life as we can, or just honor, I feel like that could be that force.
Right. I know Western society, particularly in America, we have a very unusual approach to death that is not really shared by other cultures. We sort of have this, we attach a much different mantle to it in some ways. We seem to have a much different approach. And I think, which is your point is great, because it does force us to appreciate what we have in the now. It's very much of a being in the present moment kind of an attitude, because you're going to appreciate what we have. We're not going to get wrapped up. We're not going to be distracted by our phones if we know that we are with someone and we want to appreciate them in that moment right there and then. We're not going to ignore them in favor of our phone. That's sort of the dichotomy that's going on right there.
Right. And I guess you're bringing up kind of the Western, or maybe even some aspects of Christianity, or different kinds of placements there. I don't know. Like, just I'm thinking of sort of the notion of heaven, or that there's some place. Sometimes when I think about the climate denial and some of the people that are so adamant about those things, it scares me a bit, because I wonder if they're, trying to get off planet as soon as possible anyway. So, because there's kind of this looking down upon the earth, or our corporeal, our gifts here.
Yeah, it is odd. I agree. It is odd. It does seem, that's an interesting take on it I hadn't thought of, but it almost does give you pause to think, what the heck is going on here? It seems really, really, the evidence is irrefutable, and yet they're defunding all of these things, and it's just wild. It really is wild. When you look at that, the chart that you mentioned that we opened with on that's on your website, ambientastrology.com. If you go to the monthly Antisha, you'll see the chart we're talking about. It's Washington, D.C., 10 a.m., February 26, 2017, coming up. We can see the planets lined up there, and they are right across that Aries axis. And the most predominant thing, obviously, is the Mars-Uranus conjunction, which it can really be a flashpoint. We can't I don't think we can, I don't want to sound alarmist, I really don't, but that is a very, very potent aspect. There's no question about it, especially opposing Jupiter. It's just right there. It's just crisp as can be. I remember when Uranus moved into Aries for the first time, it left its imprint on the Fukushima and the great tsunami that happened in Japan back in, what was it, 2012, I think it was, or 2008. I think it was, 2000, yeah, right, exactly. And that was really a natural disaster that I think brought the climate into the spotlight, because of the fact that here we have the Earth rumbling, and we've got nuclear power plants sitting on top of those rumbles. That is a major wake-up call regarding the climate, because we are inhabiting that climate. So that is an interesting thing. I mean, we might see a sort of a similar kind of thing happen. We don't know.
Yeah, that bringing up the Fukushima and the earthquake there in Japan, that's March 11th was when the earthquake occurred. This is 2011. And I'm just grabbing those charts because I remember, that tsunami, right, that came with the eclipse. That day, on the 11th, Uranus was actually at 29, the very last degree in minutes of Pisces when the tsunami occurred. And then the Fukushima, the kind of meltdown disaster, was literally the next day when it hit Aries. So and obviously it's all on the Aries point, but I just to be kind of a fuss budget about it, it literally was 29:57 of Pisces, just moving right out of Pisces with that tsunami.
Yeah, but within a matter of hours, it was there. It just struck very clearly.
Yeah. So, and I agree with you with not wanting to be alarmist about this upcoming Mars-Uranus conjunction, but it is, it's fascinating. I do not think, again, that this is a duplicate of another time, maybe in parallel worlds or something, but the symbolism in it is really quite intense, going back to the 30s, and the rise of Hitler. This is another thing that Ed Tamplin actually happened to mention right at the end. He doesn't actually talk about the, I think you pronounce it Reichstag fire.
Okay, right.
Yeah, so this fire, which occurred, actually, it's the return of that fire chart as well, February 27th, 1933. This fire turns out to, very likely, it was blamed on some communists setting this parliament building on fire there. And it initiated literally within 24 hours their rounding up many thousands of scientists and academics. And this so-called communist terrorist attack later on, it seems, and I think the Nuremberg trials came out that it's quite likely someone within the Nazi party created the fire. Mm-hmm. And now the thing about this chart is Mars joins up with Neptune and is in exact opposition to the sun and is actually an exact antitia to the moon Uranus. So I know this is a lot to kind of fling out, but all I want to kind of say is that the characters involved and our saving grace are thank the Lord, there might be that Jupiter is involved in this current 2017 chart, unlike back then where you had all the same players. You had Moon, Mars, Uranus, the Sun, you had the nodes and Neptune. So it is fascinating though. And I mention it because I have seen, people on Twitter, I'm on Twitter sometimes, and I've seen people sort of warning others that they think our own Reichstag fire might be coming, meaning some sort of, not necessarily an actual terrorist attack, but something that looks like one, or some reason to really sound the alarm bells and tighten down on security. Now,
I could see that happening, or also an event that was so distracting to us as a group that we were taking our eye off the ball while something happened behind the scenes.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the major factors here right now, and maybe it is because of Jupiter's involvement, and Jupiter in Libra, I mean, that's Jupiter.
It's a pleasant place for it to be. I mean, it's
it likes to be. I mean, some of the traditional rules, an air sign is ruled by Saturn, Mercury, and Jupiter by triplicity. These are just kind of ancient sort of associations. So it has some dignity there. It likes being in Libra. I think maybe Jupiter's sort of involvement, like you said, with this movement. And I think this is what's really, and I'm not a Pollyanna or hyper positive person. Sorry to break the news, but I do think it's so impressive. I mean, a lot of people are activated now and actively care about what's happening who were not activated in that way 3, 4, 5, 6 months ago. Suddenly a huge portion of the population is motivated and really wants there to be more, justice for us.
Right, and I think what I like about it is when I see things like it coming back to the small local level. Like, I'm not sure if you're familiar with what happened in Utah about a month ago when the representative from Utah, the Republican Representative Chaffetz, who was on the House Ways and Means Committee, I think. I'm not sure exactly. Don't quote me on that. But anyway, he's an influential figure in Congress. He got beaten up in a town meeting that went viral, and maybe you've heard of it.
Yes,
but
I did.
that was a really strong indication that this sends a very powerful message very quickly that this is not okay, what's happening. And I think that's the most important thing. They thought we were just going to roll over and take it, where this is a strong antidote to that, I think.
Absolutely. I did see that clip. I don't know if others did, but it's quite moving. And
Right. And I think that, the election's coming up in 2018. Now, I know it sounds crazy to be talking about another election so soon, but that is a legitimate piece of their mentality and how they operate and how they move forward. They have to be thinking of that, and they know that things are not right here. What galls me, I have to say, is that they being the Republican Party, in this case, I'm not trying to get too political here, but this is just an observation. I don't have to have an opinion either way. This is just a simple observation of history. They are taking taking the bad in hopes of getting something good for themselves out of it. And there's a real risk in that, because I think it is going to come back at some point in time to haunt them. I think that's what I would hope would be the natural progression of the human evolution, would show this to be a mistake on their part. And I just, that's just my 2 cents, I guess.
right. No, I mean, yeah, because it's an expression of it's not virtuous.
It's not virtuous. No, it certainly isn't. And it is a real expression of that. We're talking today with Kate Petty. Her website is Ambient Astrology. That's one long word, ambientastrology.com. I'd encourage you to go there and look at her information. She has a wonderful newsletter that comes out, and she does a lot of classes and teaching, and she's also great to get in touch with regard to consultation, because her view of astrology is different. As I said, it's not like it would be a traditional Western astrology, although I know she's well regarded in that regard. But I think looking through this lens, it is complementary to Western astrology as well. And I think that in that you get another whole sense of another whole dialogue unfolds as a result. So I encourage you to go there. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in about 2.5 minutes. Again, ambientastrology.com is Kate's site. We're talking with Kate Petty today. Fascinating discussion about what we see coming up in the eclipses. The precision of the alignments of planets in place certainly do bode something that's quite ominous. And I think that's kind of, it can be exciting as well as a little bit, have a little bit of trepidation around that too. But we'll be right back. So hang in there, and we'll talk about it some more on the other side.
What is your destiny? Where are you going? What is your real purpose? Do you know? Do you want to know? Of course you do. It's your duty to yourself. We are all here for a reason, and we all have great potential. Discover all of this and more with a professional astrology reading. My name is Chris Flisher, and I can help you. Discover your strengths and work on your weaknesses, and live your life to its fullest capacity. Based on your birthday, birthplace, and birth time, an authentic astrology reading will allow you to live your life to the fullest and reveal your true purpose. Only real astrology can give you real information. It is your destiny, and it is your path. Write me at chris@chrisflisher.com and book a reading today, or call me at 978-393-1036. That's 978-393-1036. www.chrisflisher.com.
Astrology is the science of spirit, and it can serve as an invaluable aid in making the difficult choices in life and seeking truth in all the directions we choose. It holds the potential to allow each of us to evolve to our highest potential. It is the logic of the universe, the code of existence, and the pathway to true wisdom. It is our duty to draw from it the instructions for our lives and to live them to our fullest potential. As the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed.
As the world shrinks and our barriers come down, diverse cultures are striving for harmony balance, and peace. To ease the transition, we need to expand with color, light, and tolerance. Now, you can become a global citizen and embrace the color and clear spirit with the divine artwork of the mandala. Mandalas are a timeless artistic offering for creating unity, harmony, and peace. My name is Chris Flisher, and I've spent years creating mandalas, and they are now available online at www.turningofthewheel.com. Come and experience the world of color, form, and function with t-shirts, coffee mugs, note cards, and limited edition prints. These vibrant, lively paintings and products express optimism, oneness, and spiritual balance for all who use them. www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. And enter a world of possibility and color.
Okay, welcome back to Turning of the Wheel. We're talking today with Kate Petty. She's an astrologer from the West Coast, and she deals with the Antisha, a fascinating aspect of astrology. Her website is ambientastrology.com. And we're talking about not only the Antisha as a construct, but also about what the charts look like coming up. And we have a couple big eclipses coming up this year. We've got one coming up on the 26th of February, which is notable, as well as the one later on in August. And the Antisha, the way it's laid out and the degrees and the patterns that we see are really startling, because we've got Mars conjunct Uranus at 21 degrees Aries. Aries is a very, everybody who knows Aries, you're listening to the radio, you know what Aries is. They're sort of impulsive and headstrong and revolutionary and fiery. And then you bring their ruling planet in there in conjunction with Uranus, and you can got the recipe for what looks like could be quite a startling event. Now, startling does not necessarily imply evil, so don't go there if you don't want to. Startling can be a revelation that wakes us all up. It can be an innovation, as we were talking about earlier, and it need not be that we have to go to that. We could be on the cusp of something that brings us to much more clarity, such as, the year of passionate resistance. All those ideas are out there, and I think it's interesting. So, Kate, when you look at this chart, and it is quite stunning, especially with regard to the contra Antisha, right? This is a strong contra Antisha chart, right? Is that am I correct in that?
Yep, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And so what does the contra Antisha, by in summation or definition, is sort of what? It's not reflective so much as it is more what's the word I'm looking for? Help me here.
Well, they share ascension, rising
right.
time.
Yep.
So the big thing with that is, the ancient astrologers, so they've been as far back as 1st century AD, Manilius in his work was writing about these points, and he referred to them as seeing and hearing signs. And these signs share something. So they're either sharing light with the Antisha, or they're sharing time with the contra Antisha. And it's actually, when you think about these patterns, how with Aries and Pisces, they're connected. And then you have Taurus and Aquarius. So you're kind of going out, flanking from the Aries point, they're connected. And Gemini and Capricorn are connected. Actually, Gemini and Capricorn, just to throw in a little synastry for fun, we know, the previous president, Barack Obama's moon is in Gemini.
Right.
And Michelle Obama's son's in Capricorn. But what probably a lot of people don't know is and we don't have Michelle Obama's birth time, but we know for the day, the sun is going to stay pretty close. That sun and moon are in very close contra Antisha. So that's where you kind of have this secret almost connection. They're definitely connected by this very old known kind of aspect. I almost called it an alternative aspect. That's awesome.
It's a real aspect. It's not fake news, right?
It is a real aspect. And I don't think they're second rate. The thing about them that I think is why they've kind of become lesser known to astrologers is that they're not as easy to see. They're not like air to air to air.
No,
and
they're not at all. No.
Or squares. And, so they're harder to see in that way. But I want, since we're talking about this and we're talking about the contra Antisha, like Gemini and Capricorn, think for a minute about how all of those signs we've just talked about, they're actually the total opposites. Whereas I'm sure all your listeners know, if if you have an opposition, like we do with Jupiter and Libra right now and Uranus and Aries, what you have is a fire and an air sign. And that's ruled by Mars, that's ruled by Venus. I mean, there are opposition flavors there, but they're both actually masculine or yang signs. So they actually do share something.
Yes, they do.
When you have the contrantitia signs in particular actually are full-fledged opposites. They're truly signs that are opposite in every way. In a way, they're like 100% complementary to each other. When they combine, like Gemini to Capricorn, you have this masculine, yang, air, and in the temperament sort of feel, air is hot and moist, and Capricorn is feminine, it's earth. And in temperament, it's dry and cold, actually. So they're opposites in every single way. And you can apply that, back then to Pisces and Aries. You have fire, you have hot, dry, and you have the cold, moist of Pisces and water. So you have this kind of, this joining, this very, from kind of how I see them, this making whole or something. You have this coming together, and it's got a little bit of everything in it.
Yeah. And I know it's interesting you mentioned him and Michelle. You mentioned Barack Obama and Michelle, because I don't think we've seen the last of them by any stretch of the imagination. Not that I suggested we would, but they've been laying low for sure, which is the etiquette and protocol that they should be doing at this point in time. But given the fact that the eclipse coming up this summer is being doubted, spoken of as the Great American Eclipse in Leo and Aquarius. He is a Leo with an Aquarius moon, an Aquarius ascendant. So this is I think he may step back into the limelight for a lot of reasons. Number one, because he's still young and very active, and because there's so much good grace in his camp, so to speak. He's an element of the opposite in some ways. He's a diplomat of the opposite of what we're seeing now.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I've been recently, I've just happened to be watching Oliver Stone's Untold History of the United States, and these clips of like Franklin Roosevelt and things. I mean, and Wallace, just people that they inspire you. And it's so intense right now to feel like we are kind of, but I think on some level, like you were saying in a way earlier, like I think we're definitely finding it locally sometimes, often. We're finding it within ourselves, I think. More so
than we have in the past. This has sort of been a major wake-up call for a lot of us to have a soul-searching process whereby we don't just roll over and go to sleep and wait for another 4 years to go by. I think this is a time where, and the thing is that, the types of events that we've witnessed over this election cycle, that the scandals that have broken, that have just sort of washed over this person, would have brought anybody down at any point in American history, but have not this time. That absurdity of the potency of these things, such as the Hollywood access, such as the calling out of the Muslim with the son who got the Purple Heart. Everything is so blatantly in our face. It's shocking for us to say, how could anybody say that? And yet it doesn't seem to stop. That in itself, the volatility of the kinds of things that are coming up raises our attention to the point where it forces us to be angry. This is sort of like, the bad forces us to be good, and this is really bad, so we've got to be really good, I guess, in response.
Something, right? I mean, it's very hard to stomach.
It is. It's unfathomable. I'm old enough to remember when Gary Hart ran for president, and he got caught in an affair with a girl on a boat, and he shrugged it off, and it brought him right down. And John, what was his name? The guy from South Carolina, who ran back, I guess it was in the 2008, and his wife was dying. She had breast cancer. I can't think of his last name, and it's going to come to me sooner or later. But anyway, he also went down at the same time in a similar fashion. But these kinds of events did not bring down this particular character, and that's what is surprising to me.
It's very strange, and I mean, obviously, we can't blame it on astrology. I never do that. It's not really for that. But I mean, certainly it
validates it in some ways. I mean,
does validate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It does validate. And I think that Uranus, Neptune, and of course, we're all aware that there was the Saturn Neptune square all this last year too.
Right.
I guess I'm going to bring up Ed Templin one more time, but he does, he points out, I love the USA chart. I love the Sibley chart. That's July 4th, 1776. And there's also the Liberty chart, which is 2 days before. And of course that's these are kind of complicated charts to have solid times for.
Well, I use the 5:08 p.m. for the Sibley chart. I'm not sure what you use.
The Sagittarius.
Yeah.
Rising and mid Sagittarius. He has been pointing out how Neptune is transiting the bottom of the chart. It's squaring the ascendant. I mean, on some level, a lot of people have been sort of asleep. I mean, they've been shooken, awake some. And this, of course, can speak also to the drug issues, the epidemic. But I think it also probably speaks to kind of the insidiousness, along with these eclipses in Neptune in the South Node. There's just this there are more secrets, right? We all know that. We know that there's something going on beyond even what we know, which is that there's been so much fake news and that it's propaganda, but what for? Like, we don't know what is really going to come of this. And I think
to what end do we endure this, and why? I did a talk on duty versus delusion over the summer, where it was speaking directly to that Saturn Neptune square, because of the simple fact, you look at the two main characters on the stage. At the time, we had this delusional reality TV star, and then we have the strict sort of Saturnian character in Hillary Clinton. And I just thought of Saturn as being more powerful and more responsible, and it turns out that it was. When we think of the popular vote, it actually was more powerful and responsible. It's just that we have this crazy electoral college system, which leaves people open to being bought. We don't know what's going on with Russia with regard to all this. There is a lot here that's not being divulged.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I mean, given the number of people that didn't even vote, and the closeness of some of the states in those,
it was down to 1,000 votes or less, or in that range, very, very tight. So there could be that this sort of, Mars Uranus conjunction could be the final. We finally understand what role Russia has in this. We finally get to the bottom of this. I mean, that could be a revelation that would really upset things. I mean, that could set in stage motion for, pretty drastic action.
Most definitely would. Do you, in your assessment of it or your feel about it, do you think it's something that could emerge that soon? Because even though things are happening at the speed of light, they really are, like, every day. I really wish that there would be more kind of
Well, there's a lot of things that sort of stand out. I mean, the fact that, this may just be completely conjecture on my part, but I have to find it very unusual that the ambassador from Russia to the United Nations died just the other day. At a very young, very popular sort of ambassador dies. It's like, what did he know? And did he die of natural causes? Or, we don't know if he was injected with something that made it look like he had a heart attack or whatever. I mean, we don't know. We just don't know. And those things always catch my attention.
Well, yeah. And there's been multiple cases here just in the last month and a half.
Mm-hmm. And the thing is that Russia is in dire straits, and the only way, and this is a historical fact, every time a country is in trouble domestically, what they'll do is they'll try to react internationally, so to draw attention away from their own domestic problems. Putin is in rough shape right now because of all the sanctions. Oil is not doing what it was supposed to do. They don't make anything. They don't export anything except for vodka and caviar. That's not enough to keep an economy going. And I'm being trite there in some ways, I suppose, by limiting it to that. But that there really is a very strong argument that they're in tough shape, and therefore they would benefit the most. That's the thing. Who benefits the most in a situation like this? That's where you find the answer.
Right. Well, yeah, and I was listening to a Charlie Rose program that I encourage people to go and find.
Yeah, I love Charlie Rose.
It's a quite good one, and they just talk very pragmatically, just like you sort of are right now. I think it's I know there's an Italian journalist, and
Oh, I think I saw that one. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's quite good. I would, I hear you, and it's wild. It's like, here we are kind of, I mean, we're definitely in limbo. We're literally between eclipses right this minute, but it's just like the world is watching, of course, which is another point of the Antisha, actually, and contra Antisha. It's thought, and has been written about, especially more by modern astrologers, but because these are the seasonal turning points, and they're really these, intersections, great circle intersections, it brings things onto the world stage when things are linked by Antisha and contra Antisha more than sometimes. I mean, we know we experience aspects, coming through stories in the news, or like definitely themes, and things play out. But these are, they're thought to. It's like these are the angles of the Earth.
Yeah.
And so it's really meant to like play out on the stage, which is also why I brought up the Obamas, because within synastry, or even in one's own chart, but in synastry, if you have people that connect that way, it doesn't always mean you'll be famous and known worldwide, you and your whoever that is, the other person is. But sometimes when you are, that might be how you're seen. I know that Freud and Jung, for instance, had a lot of connections, and they are, even though they didn't remain in a friendly, like, colleague situation till the end. That's how we think of them. We think
right. We do think of them that way. I wonder, I was getting back to the idea of the Obamas, and I wonder what sort of the protocol is for an ex-president to speak up again. And maybe they wait for the first 100 days to go. I don't think they just evaporate into the distance. I mean, I think that because things are so fractious right now, this would be an opportunity for them to step back into the limelight after that 100 days. He's come out already, and he's sort of broken precedent by saying a few things now and then. I think he's just recharging his batteries. But I would be very surprised if he didn't come back and lead some sort of, he has enough support behind him. If he wouldn't, and so does Michelle, they could almost be the leaders of some sort of a movement that would sort of offset this. I do think that the democracy is resilient enough to sort of stop this. And I'm always surprised. I have to say this. I'm always surprised that the press gets such bad rap, because I think the press are doing an amazing job. I may be biased in that regard, but thank God that they're there. That's all I can say. I mean, you can
absolutely.
I don't know where we'd be without them at this point in time.
Yeah. No. Freedom of speech, freedom of expression. Oh my goodness. Without that.
I mean, and the fact that they keep asking questions, and the fact that there's this a growing mountain of events that are just so bizarrely out of reality that all we can do, if someone says the sky is green and you're supposed to agree with them, you just can't. It's blue, and if it's raining, it's raining. And some things are black and white decisions, and when they're said to be the opposite, or stuff is pulled out of the sky from nowhere, you have to ask yourself, who in their right mind could possibly believe that? Which does make you think twice. That's why we're seeing articles about, is this guy mentally insane? Is he stable? I mean, these are questions, I think, that are worth putting out there. I'm sure a lot of people feel that way, and I'm not trying to make any, as I said, I'm trying to be objective with our assessment of what's going on here. We're really trying to look at this through the lens of astrology, and be keen on our position in that regard, especially with regard to history. But we do see these trends are there, and these things, odd events are there that just make us scratch our head.
Yeah, they're very unsettling, and thank goodness for a lot of press that's, I was really quite unsettled how much coverage, last year, the last year and a half, that he was getting, and I just thought it was so irresponsible. I just think, they're not that there should be a bunch held back necessarily or what have you, but just a lot of power went through there.
Well, you know
And
what? I think it's the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and if the more outlandish you are, the more press you're going to get. That is true, and that did work in his favor, I suppose, to get him elected. But I think it'll also be the element of what brings him down because of these delusional ideas. People are going to start saying this can't be true. Something is drastically wrong here. I do believe in the greater ability for people to have a sense of relevance and stability here. I just can't see them. If it's raining, it's raining. Okay, if there was no event in if nothing happened in Sweden, nothing happened in Sweden. You can't just make that stuff up.
no,
I
period.
mean,
Yeah.
or
I
whatever
know.
the case would be. And I think there's got to be something. I mean, there are enough sane people in there, I think, who will stabilize this. And it could be an event that happens from within. We don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess we'll see. Clearly that's what we do. But
Yeah, and all we can really do is hypothesize. But I think that the astrology is incredibly vibrant right now, very, very potent, very, very alive. It has all the underpinnings of drastic change, revolution is there. It's all there. And some people would argue, well, Trump was a revolution. I know that some Vedic astrologers predicted that he would win, and they say he's here for a purpose. If that purpose is to grab our attention and get us out of our phones, then so be it.
yeah, I do hear that a lot as far as so many people being motivated now and moved and very active, becoming more so, maybe just learning more about our republic or the history, whatever. And that's true. And it is, yeah, as much as I hate to say it or something, it just absolutely is true that it would not most likely had come about in this way. Although I think we know, like, if Clinton had won the Electoral College, and who knows what other Neptunian stuff is behind and under there. I'm not a huge conspiracy person, but we do know that, of course, there was interference. But, if she had, I mean, it seems like a lot of people, even though she would have probably been attacked and what have you, it wouldn't have slowed down.
It wouldn't have slowed down, but it also would have been a revolutionary act in itself because it would have been the first woman to take the office of the highest, station in the world. So that would have been a revolutionary event in and of itself. Would it have been status quo? I don't know. I think the outside interference is a huge piece in that. I think that Russian and Putin in particular would be very fearful of Hillary's role. I think she would have imposed even harsher sanctions. I think she would have come down on him very hard. And it's just there's a lot that is not answered. And it's interesting because the people who have typically historically been the most against communism as a philosophy have been the far right, and here we are embracing them, and the far right is embracing them. So, or the right at least is embracing them. That to me in itself is an oddball kind of thing.
Right. Well, I think that as an astrologer, there's other things we look to, and because of so much Neptune influence here with the South Node and the eclipse, and then it's going to be very dominant in our upcoming Aries chart. The chart that sort of resets the year. It's that Aries ingress when the sun moves into Aries, first day of spring in the northern hemisphere. That chart has been used for a very long time. It's a very important chart for the country, and that chart has Neptune right on the ascendant. So that's where it kind of feels like when I saw that, it's like, it doesn't feel like this is going to be wrapped up here in the next couple weeks.
Yeah, no, I think you're right about that. Neptune will muddy the waters. I can see that. I see what you're saying there.
Yeah.
I think that, that may mean that it takes a little longer than we would envision, but I think that the gears are in motion. I mean, the simple fact that words are already being bandied about with regard to this administration, such as, how do we stop it? All those words, to me, I think that's a historical precedent in itself, just the fact that those words are being mentioned at a time such as this.
Absolutely. Totally unprecedented. Every single aspect of this is unprecedented, which is why, because of that involvement, I mean, I have to think people, of course, talking about impeachment or other things. I don't see how the whole election isn't illegitimate.
I know. That's what I don't get. And that's where I think that's based on the powers that be, the sort of this lust for the power, and that over, absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's that idea of, the seizing of the power is a where they are, I think, is a they're bowing down to the opportunity of where they are and what they can get done in their agenda, rather than seeing this as an opportunity for the greater good, or taking steps to make it right for the greater good. There seems to be that.
Right.
Fascinating. So let's just get back to the Antisha one more time, because we're running out of time here. When you look at that chart for the, have you run a chart for the eclipse coming up in August, that what they're calling the Great American Eclipse? Because it is.
I know. Absolutely, I have. And it's quite interesting. Yeah.
It's coming right across the United States, which is, we're going to be able, people in parts of up in Northwest where you are, and all the way down across the, sort of through Colorado, I guess, and into Kentucky, Nashville, around there, and then on into South Carolina, will be able to see the real, true eclipse, that's in itself is major.
It's super major. This is coast to coast, right under Portland, out through South Carolina, like you said. And I know that we've had other eclipses, solar eclipses, total solar eclipses hit the U.S., but I don't think there has been one like this, coast to coast, since I think the last one was 1918.
Wow.
I know there have been others that have touched for sure and come over parts, but I don't think there's been one coast to coast since 1918. And I just have to share, because it's so weird. I don't know if you or your listeners heard about the massive beaching of all those pilot whales in New Zealand. This was about a week and a half ago. There were, at the time when I heard about it, was 400 something, and I think now it's actually, the numbers are more in the 600. And some of them, they were able to get off the beach, and but many hundreds died. At least 300 to 400 died, and I think it's one of the third largest that have been recorded for the last couple hundred years. And the largest one ever was like 1,000 whales were beached there, and that was in 1918. And I just thought it was so weird, like, because the eclipse is not running there. But one thing that came to mind is kind of like these Antisha. In fact, they're kind of a cousin. We have parallel in declination. We have kind of the latitude bands up the equator and below. Well, New Zealand, sort of where the whales were beached, is a contraparallel reflection to sort of the U.S. So I don't know that because they don't actually know why.
Interesting.
Periodically, very rarely, but I just thought it was so odd that.
And we look back to 1918. There was a huge pandemic of the Spanish flu back then, which killed millions of people. So those kinds of things are also floating around out there. We're not trying to give people food for worry. We have enough things to worry about, but it's just good to know this stuff. It's just good to have in the back of your mind, and I think you approach it with a positive attitude, and you're okay. But I think it's educational to watch and interesting to see it, because the astrology really does crispen up those aspects completely, and just it's spot on with regard to that, and it's just really powerful.
Yeah. And I certainly do not want to frighten listeners at all. It's, I'm always looking for kind of repetitions because of these cycles, and not necessarily like the same activities or actions, but
right.
People would think, certainly we can find omens or make meaning out of all kinds of things. In fact, probably everything profane.
Yes, we could. Yeah. And that's what we have to caution people about. I think that, and don't forget, history is cyclical. I certainly do think that. I wouldn't be an astrologer if I didn't think that. But we have to know that each time that this circle goes around, wherever that may be, we are down the stream further. And so therefore things change. And when things change, scenes change, different mechanisms are in place that allow us to adapt and mold. We're not going anywhere. I do think that we're going to be fine. But it is interesting to watch this from the astrological standpoint, simply because what we're seeing is jaw-dropping in many ways, because it is so precise and crisp. And, none of us can predict the future. We're not trying to, per se, but we are trying to make us all aware of what potential is there. And I think if we know the potential, then we can respond accordingly.
Yeah, and I think it's also, like you said, even though some portions of these cycles repeat, there's always different players and a little different places for sure. For instance, when we've talked about the 1933 conjuncts, Uranus, Neptune, this sort of business, Jupiter was not involved in these signatures. And right now, like this eclipse coming up next week, Jupiter, we've been focusing so much on the conjunctia, of course, the Pisces to Aries, but Jupiter over there in Libra at 22.5 degrees is also an exact reflection to the 8 Pisces eclipse, right? That's on right. The antissa, the shared light. So Jupiter is part of this eclipse. It's part of this year. Jupiter is very involved with the Neptune by that antissa reflection and exactly tied to the sun moon. So now we know Jupiter can make a big thing bigger or doesn't necessarily solve all problems or something, but I do think there's an element of growth that's occurring. And of course, being in Libra, again, bringing in the scales and justice, I do think that, that's the tone. It's
I mean, I have to say, I do feel better with Jupiter around. I mean, I know it can amplify. I know it can illuminate and make things much bigger than they need to be. And we probably have seen the influence of that in some regard in our lives, but I also think that it's got a saving quality to it. So I'm encouraged by the presence of Jupiter, if nothing else. That's what gets me to sleep at night, is the fact that Jupiter's out there. So I feel okay.
That's funny.
Anyway, we had a great conversation here. My guest today has been Kate Petty. Her website is Ambient Astrology. Ambient Astrology is one long word, ambientastrology.com. I encourage you to check out her website. It's a beautiful website, beautifully done with great taste, and she's an artist as well, and she does classes. She will do individual consultations for you. She's got a fabulous newsletter that comes out every month, and so I encourage you to tap into her and see what she's all about. It's a fascinating area of astrology that really adds more granularity to our already complex rules of astrology, so I encourage you to do that. And Kate, it's been great talking to you today. I wish we had more time, but we don't. Thanks so much for coming on today. It's always fun to have you and enlightening. So
it's been my pleasure. Absolutely, Chris.
It's
Thank
good.
you so
it's
much.
good to know. It's good to know you're out there.
I'm glad. Likewise.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Turning of the Wheel with your host, Chris Flisher. To schedule a reading with me or to order artwork, you may visit my website at www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. Or you can call me at 978-393-1036. Thank you. And as always, be open to possibilities.